The Battle of Kadesh took place between the forces of the Egyptian Empire under Ramesses II and the Hittite Empire under Muwatalli II at the city of Kadesh on the Orontes River, just upstream of Lake Homs near the modern Syrian-Lebanese border. The battle is generally dated to 1274 BC of the conventional Egyptian chronology, and is the earliest battle in recorded history for which details of tactics and formations are known. It was probably the largest chariot battle ever fought, involving perhaps 5,000–6,000 chariots. Background: after expelling the Hyksos 15th dynasty, the native Egyptian New Kingdom rulers became more aggressive in reclaiming control of their state's borders. Thutmose I, Thutmose III and his son and co-regent Amenhotep II fought battles from Megiddo north to the Orontes River, including conflict with Kadesh. Many of the Egyptian campaign accounts between c. 1400 and 1300 BC reflect the general destabilization of the region of the Jahi. The reigns of Thutmose IV and Amenhotep III were undistinguished, except that Egypt continued to lose territory to Mitanni in northern Syria. During the late Egyptian 18th dynasty, the Amarna letters tell the story of the decline of Egyptian influence in the region. The Egyptians showed flagging interest here until almost the end of the dynasty. Hormheb, the last ruler of this dynasty, campaigned in this region, finally beginning to turn Egyptian interest back to this region. This process continued in the 19th dynasty. Like his father Ramesses I, Seti I was a military commander and set out to restore Egypt's empire to the days of the Thutmose kings almost a century before. Inscriptions on Karnak temple walls record the details of his campaigns into Canaan and Syria. He took 20,000 men and reoccupied abandoned Egyptian posts and garrisoned cities. He made an informal peace with the Hittites, took control of coastal areas along the Mediterranean, and continued to campaign in Canaan. A second campaign led him to capture Kadesh and Amurru. His son and heir Ramesses II campaigned with him. Historical records exist which record a large weapons order by Ramesses II the year prior to the expedition he led to Kadesh in his fifth regnal year. However, at some point, both regions may have lapsed back into Hittite control. What exactly happened to Amurru is disputed. The Hittitologist Trevor Bryce suggests that, although it may have fallen once again under Hittite control, it is more likely Amurru remained a Hittite vassal state. The immediate antecedents to the Battle of Kadesh were the early campaigns of Ramesses II into Canaan. In the fourth year of his reign, he marched north into Syria, either to recapture Amurru or, as a probing effort, to confirm his vassals' loyalty and explore the terrain of possible battles. The recovery of Amurru was Muwatalli's stated motivation for marching south to confront the Egyptians. Ramesses marched north in the fifth year of his reign and encountered the Hittites at Kadesh. Kadesh campaign. Ramesses' army crossed the Egyptian border in the spring of year 5 of his reign and, after a month's march, reached the area of Kadesh from the south. The Hittite king Muwatalli, who had mustered several of his allies, had positioned his troops behind Old Kadesh, but Ramesses, misled by two spies whom the Egyptians had captured, thought the Hittite forces were still far off at Aleppo, and ordered his forces to set up camp. The contending forces in the spring of the fifth year of his reign, in May 1274 BC, Ramesses II launched his campaign from his capital Pi-Ramesses. The army moved beyond the fortress of Tjel and along the coast leading to Gaza. Ramesses led an army of 4 divisions: Ammon, Re, Seth and the apparently newly formed Ptah division. There was also a poorly documented troop called the Nrrn, possibly Canaanite military mercenaries with Egyptian allegiance or even Egyptians, which Ramesses II had left in Amurru, apparently in order to secure the port of Sumer. This division would come to play a critical role in the battle. Also significant was the presence of Sheridan troops among the Egyptian army. This is the first time they appear as Egyptian mercenaries, and they would play an increasingly significant role in Late Bronze Age history, ultimately appearing among the sea peoples that ravaged the East Mediterranean at the end of the Bronze Age. Helian armies of the pharaohs observes, "It is not possible to be precise about the size of the Egyptian chariot force at Kadesh, though it could not have numbered less than 2,000 vehicles, spread through the core of Ammon, Ptah and Sutik, assuming that approx. 500 machines were allocated to each corps. To this we may need to add those of the Eni Aaron, for if they were not native Egyptian troops their number may not have been formed from chariots detached from the army corps." On the Hittite side, Ramesses II recorded a long list of 19 Hittite allies brought to Kadesh by Muwatalli. This list is of considerable interest to Hittitologists as it reflects the extent of Hittite influence at the time. Battle Ramesses II describes his arrival on the battlefield in the two principal inscriptions he wrote concerning the battle, the so-called poem and the bulletin. As Ramesses and the Egyptian advance guard were about 11 kilometers from Kadesh, south of Shabtuna, he met two Shasu who told him that the Hittites were in the land of Aleppo, on the north of Tunip, 200 kilometers away, where, the Shasu said, they were afraid of Pharaoh LPH to come south. This was, state the Egyptian texts, a false report ordered by the Hittites, with the aim of preventing the army of His Majesty from drawing up to combat with the foe of Hatti. Egyptian scouts then returned to his camp bringing two new Hittite prisoners. Under torture, the second group of spies revealed that the entire Hittite army and the Hittite king were actually close at hand. In his haste to capture Kadesh, Ramesses II committed a major tactical error. He increased the distance between his Ammon division and the remaining Re, Ptah and Seth divisions, thereby splitting up his combined forces. When they were attacked by the Hittites, Ramesses II complained of the failure of his officials to dispatch scouts to discover the true location of the Hittites and report their location to him. The pharaoh quickly sent urgent messengers to hasten the arrival of the Ptah and Seth divisions of his army, which were still some distance away on the far side of the river Orontes. Some of its survivors fled to the safety of the Ammon camp, but they were pursued by the Hittite forces. The Hittite chariotry crashed through the Ammon camp's shield wall and began their assault. This created panic among the Ammon troops as well. However, the momentum of the Hittite attack was already starting to wane, as the impending obstacles of such a large camp forced many Hittite charioteers to slow their attack. Some were killed in chariot crashes. In the Egyptian account of the battle, Ramesses describes himself as being deserted and surrounded by enemies. "No officer was with me, no charioteer, no soldier of the army, no shield-bearer, only with help from the gods did Ramesses II personally defeat his attackers and return to the Egyptian lines. I was before them like Set in his moment. I found the Massa chariot in whose midst I was, scattering him before my horses." The pharaoh, now facing a desperate fight for his life, summoned up his courage, called upon his god Ammon, and fought valiantly to save himself. Ramesses personally led several charges into the Hittite ranks together with his personal guard. Some of the chariots from his Ammon division and survivors from the routed division of Re, and using the superior maneuverability of their chariots and the power and range of Egyptian composite bows, deployed and attacked the overextended and tired Hittite chariotry. The Hittites, meanwhile, who understandably believed their enemies to be totally routed, had stopped to loot the Egyptian camp and, in doing so, became easy targets for Ramesses' counterattack. Ramesses' action was successful in driving the Hittites back towards the Orontes and away from the Egyptian camp, while in the ensuing pursuit, the heavier Hittite chariots were easily overtaken and dispatched by the lighter, faster, Egyptian chariots. Although he had suffered a significant reversal, Muwatalai still commanded a large force of reserve chariotry and infantry plus the walls of the town. As the retreat reached the river, he ordered another 1,000 chariots to attack the Egyptians, the stiffening element consisting of the high nobles who surrounded the king. As the Hittite forces approached the Egyptian camp again, the Eni troop contingent from Amurru suddenly arrived, this time surprising the Hittites. Ramesses had also reorganized his forces and, expecting the help, also attacked from the camp. After 6 charges, the Hittite forces were almost surrounded, and the survivors were faced with the humiliation of having to swim back across the Orontes River to rejoin their infantry. Pinned against the Orontes, the elements remaining of the Hittites not overtaken in the withdrawal were forced to abandon their chariots and attempt to swim the Orontes, according to Egyptian accounts hurriedly, where many of them drowned. The next morning, a second, inconclusive battle was fought. Muwatalai is reported by Ramesses to have called for a truce, but this may be propaganda since Hittite records note no such arrangement. Neither side gained total victory. Both the Egyptians and the Hittites had suffered heavy casualties. The Egyptian army failed to break Kadesh's defenses, while the Hittite army had failed to gain a victory in the face of what earlier must have seemed certain success. There is no consensus about the outcome or what took place, with views ranging from an Egyptian victory to a draw, or, in the view of Iranian Egyptologist Mehdi Ahmadi, an Egyptian defeat. Aftermath: logistically unable to support a long siege of the walled city of Kadesh, Ramesses gathered his troops and retreated south towards Damascus and ultimately back to Egypt. Once back in Egypt, Ramesses proclaimed victory, having routed his enemies. However, he didn't try further to capture Kadesh. In a personal sense, however, the Battle of Kadesh was a triumph for Ramesses since, after blundering into a devastating Hittite chariot ambush, the young king had courageously rallied his scattered troops to fight on the battlefield while escaping death or capture. The new lighter, faster, 2-man Egyptian chariots were able to pursue and take down the slower 3-man Hittite chariots from behind as they overtook them. The leading elements of Hittites' retreating chariots were thus pinned against the river, and in several hieroglyphic inscriptions related to Ramesses, 2, set to flee across the river, abandoning their chariots, swimming as fast as any crocodile in their flight. Hittite records from Bofaskoi, however, tell of a very different conclusion to the greater campaign, where a chastened Ramesses was forced to depart from Kadesh in defeat. Modern historians essentially conclude the battle was a draw, a great moral victory for the Egyptians, who had developed new technologies and rearmed before pushing back against the years-long steady incursions by the Hittites. The Hittite king, Muwatalai II, continued to campaign as far south as the Egyptian province of Upi, which he captured and placed under the control of his brother Hattusili, the future Hattusili III. Egypt's sphere of influence in Asia was now restricted to Canaan. Even this was threatened for a time by revolts among Egypt's vassal states in the Levant, and Ramesses was compelled to embark on a series of campaigns in Canaan in order to uphold his authority there before he could initiate further assaults against the Hittite Empire. In the 8th and 9th years of his reign, Ramesses extended his military successes. This time, he proved more successful against his Hittite foes when he successfully captured the cities of Dapur and Tunip, where no Egyptian soldier had been seen since the time of Thutmose III, almost 120 years previously. His victory proved to be ephemeral, however. The thin strip of territory pinched between Amurru and Kadesh did not make for a stable possession. Within a year, they had returned to the Hittite fold, which meant that Ramesses had to march against Dapur once more in his 10th year. His second success here was equally as meaningless as his first, since neither Egypt nor Hatti could decisively defeat the other in battle. The running borderlands conflicts were finally concluded some 15 years after the Battle Battle of Kadesh by an official peace treaty in the 21st year of Ramesses II's reign, with Hattusili III, the new king of the Hittites. The treaty that was established was inscribed on a silver tablet, of which a clay copy survived in the Hittite capital of Hattusa, in modern Turkey, and is on display at the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. An enlarged replica of the Kadesh Agreement hangs on a wall at the headquarters of the United Nations, as the earliest international peace treaty known to historians. Its text, in the Hittite version, appears in the links below. An Egyptian version survives on a papyrus documentation. Although there is more evidence in the form of texts and wall reliefs for this battle than for any other battle in the ancient Near East, almost all of it is from an Egyptian perspective, and indeed the first scholarly report on the battle, by James Henry Breasted in 1903, praised these sources, which allowed the reconstruction the battle with certainty. However, some historians argue that the battle was a draw at best, and that Egyptian influence over Amurru and Kadesh seems to have been lost forever. The main source of information is in the Egyptian record of the battle, for which a general level of accuracy is assumed despite factual errors and propaganda. The bombastic nature of Ramesses' version has long been recognized. The Egyptian version of the Battle of Kadesh is recorded in two primary forms, known as the poem and the bulletin. The poem has been questioned as actual verse, as opposed to a prose account similar to what other pharaohs had recorded. Similarly, the bulletin is itself simply a lengthy caption accompanying the reliefs. These inscriptions are repeated multiple times. In addition to these lengthy presentations, there are also numerous small captions used to point out various elements of the battle. Outside of the inscriptions, there are textual occurrences preserved in Papyrus Rafet and Papyrus Salia III, and a rendering of these same events in a letter from Ramesses to Hattusili III written in response to a scoffing complaint by Hattusili about the pharaoh's victorious depiction of the battle. Hittite references to the battle, including the above letter, have been found at Hattusa, although no annals have been discovered that might describe it as part of a campaign. Instead, there are various references made to it in the context of other events. This is especially true of Hattusili III, for whom the battle marked an important milestone in his career. Hittite allies sources. Goetze, A. The Hittites and Syria, in Cambridge Ancient History p. 253, Gardner, Alan, The Kadesh Inscriptions of Ramesses II pp. 57 ff. Breasted, James Henry, Ancient Records of Egypt, Historical Records pp. 125 ff. Lichtheim, Miriam, Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 2, The New Kingdom pp. 57 ff. In addition to these allies, the Hittite king also hired the services of some of the local Shasu tribes. Hittite Fallen Source. Gardner, Alan, The Kadesh Inscriptions of Ramesses II pp. 39-41.